Okay, we are beginning here with our new section, deployment and instance management section. So under this section, we will be talking about the services starting from Elastic Beanstalk, EBS, OpsWorks, Code Deploy, CloudFormation, Service Catalog, SAM Serverless Application, Model, AWS SDK, AWS CDK, Cloud Development Kit, and deployment comparisons, and AWS Systems Manager, maybe AWS System Manager, SSM, somewhat Session Manager we will not be discussing, but the Session Manager is not that a big thing. So this is all the topics we will be covering here in this section, and we are going to here start with the Elastic Beanstalk. So AWS Elastic Beanstalk, so let's get into it. So Beanstalk is going to be more on developer exam side, but from a solution architect professional exam, you need to understand that it is a great platform to re-platform your application from on-premise to AWS cloud. So the idea is that it's a developer-centric view of deploying an application on AWS, and it's just a wrapper around all the components that we know from before. So like EC2 instances, auto scaling groups, Elastic IP, Elastic Load Balancer, RDS, etc. But it's in one view. It's all in one view. It's easy to make sense of it. So we still have control over all the configuration of each component. But Beanstalk gives you some flexibility for deployment. Beanstalk is going to be free, but you pay for the underlying resources. That's going to be Elastic IP, Elastic Load Balancer, Auto Scaling Group, EC2 instances, RDS, somewhat storage in S3. So these are the actually the underlying thing of the Elastic Beanstalk. So Beanstalk had support for many platforms, and you have to remember some of them, like Go, Java with Tomcat, and that is very important, because if you have Tomcat application on premise and you want to migrate to the cloud, Java with Tomcat is great option on Beanstalk. .NET application for Windows Server, Node.js, PHP, Python, Ruby, and then we have Packer Builder. So you can see there's a bunch of support for many different runtimes, and if you don't have runtime that is supported by Beanstalk, it is possible for you to use a single Docker container or a multi-container Docker or a pre-configured Docker. The idea is that if you can Dockerize your application, then you can migrate it to Elastic Beanstalk. And if it's not supported, you can write your own custom platform, which is advanced. And so the idea is that Beanstalk is going to be a perfect solution to re-platform your application from on-premise to AWS cloud. And that means moving your runtime onto Beanstalk and have your application run as a native AWS application without changing the code too much. Okay, so Beanstalk is a managed service by AWS. That means all the instance configuration and the OS configuration will be handled by Beanstalk. The deployment strategy is also configurable, and but it will be performed by Beanstalk as well. So you have different rollout strategies. The only thing is responsibility of you is the application code. And so you have three architecture models on Beanstalk. We can see the number one is like a single instance deployment, which is great for developer environment. Load balancer plus auto scaling group, which is good for production or production web application. And finally, just an auto scaling group, which is good for if you have non-web application in production. And this is really called like the worker environment. So we have worker environment, single instance deployment, and the like production environment, different such of those. So let's have a look at how it looks like in terms of diagram. So the first thing we have is going to be a single instance, and the architecture chosen by Beanstalk. So in this example, is obvious only one availability zone we have chosen, and we have EC2 instance, and we will have an Elastic IP attached to our EC2 instance. And why? Because in case the EC2 instance is replaced for whatever updates, then the Elastic IP can be moved over the new EC2 instance, and from a client's perspective, the change in the upgrade is going to be seamless. Finally, you can set up Amazon RDS database through Beanstalk for having your EC2 instance communicate with a database later. If it needs to, the instance is going to be obviously set up in only one AZ. So these single instance deployments are great for development environments because you can quickly show your application and it's going to be very cost effective. And if you want high availability, a more production like setup, then you need to use a load balancer, for example, an application load balancer. And then your application is going to be multi-AZ. So in this example, I have only represented 2 AZ, 2 availability zone, but it can obviously be there. So like you have 2 AZ and auto scaling group of EC2 instances that can scale over time to handle more or less traffic, and then we can even set up an RDS database again in terms of storing our backend data. But this time, because this is more production deployment, we should use a multi-edge deployment of RDS when we have a master and a standby database. This is for number 2. And then number 3 is a worker tier, which is very important. So in this example, we have an SQS queue that is managed by Elastic, that is managed by Beanstalk, and we have a worker tier, which consists of an EC2 auto scaling group, as you will be able to see that EC2 auto scaling group, uh, EC2 auto scaling group, and that will read from the SQS queue and scale based on the queue load. So the idea is that we have 3 different kinds of deployment for Beanstalk, and you need to know them going into the exam. Now, now let's talk about the difference between the web server and worker environment in Beanstalk. So in case your application performs long tasks, and this task can take a lot of CPU power and threads from your web servers, so it's usually better to offload this task into a dedicated worker environment. And by doing this, you are decoupling your application into 2 tiers. You're decoupling your application into 2 tiers, and that is very common approach. Uh, and That is very common approach here. And so anytime here decoupling, remember it has to be SQS, okay, simple queue service. So for example, what are the kind of tasks there could be long to complete? So processing a video, maybe if you want to add some kind of text on top of that video, or generating a zip file, or creating a very complicated filter for your image, it is on top of it. And in your worker environment, if you are able to define a bunch of periodic tasks to be done using cron.yml file, and then which will run cron jobs directly from your worker environment. Okay, so let's now have a look at the typical architecture of a Beanstalk. You would have your web tier for Beanstalk, which consists of our application load balancer and your auto scaling group. And that is going to be a production like deployment. And then we are going to have a worker tier also managed by Beanstalk, which consists of an SQS queue and an EC2 instance managed by auto scaling group. And the idea is that if web tier has some dedicated task that be long to complete, then it would put this task into SQS queue, and your auto scaling group will automatically process these tasks. So this is a classic architecture, and the good thing is that both of these tiers can be managed by Elastic Beanstalk. Next, we have blue-green deployments, which is not a direct feature of Beanstalk, but the idea is that it gives you a zero downtime and a release facility. So the idea is that you would create a new stage environment and you would deploy a version 2 there, create a new stage version 2 there, and so we create a Beanstalk environment. Then you validate that this environment, which is the green environment, can be working as expected. In case there is any problem, you can roll it back by deleting it. And then you would set up Route 53 to use weighted routing to make sure you can shift a little bit of the traffic to the new environment. Okay, so if you use the Beanstalk swap URL feature, which is a DNS swap, then this basically shifts all the traffic from one environment to another. So you have 2 different strategies. So here is the example using weighted routing and Route 53. So the web traffic does DNS queries onto Route 53, and then maybe 90% of your traffic will be sent into your blue environment, and then 10% of your traffic will be sent to your green environment, and that is using a weighted routing policy in Route 53. And then you can shift the percentage over time, and then when you are ready, you have effectively shifted all your traffic from your V1 to your V2, that is the green environment, and this is called the blue-green deployment. Okay, so that's all you need to know for the Beanstalk as going for the exam of the Solution Architect Professional. Remember, Beanstalk is going to be a great platform when you want to migrate an application from on-premise to the cloud and re-platform it. And finally, it's going to be a great choice to manage both your web server applications and your worker tiers. Okay, so that's it for this lecture, and I will see you in the next one.